It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
And here we are, breaking all the rules. Tell you what, Mark showed up, 3-4 minutes early, and we had a conversation before the show, so I'm not sure this is going to be off the rails because we are so prepared. I think I should just mention, though, like, you pushed all the updates, right?
I did.
So for those
deployed, Tim,
for those that listen to this on the podcast site, which is where you should listen to it. You should listen to the podcast. I mean, the YouTube quality, you get to see us, but and that's, I don't know if that's a pro or a con, honestly, Mark. But but the audio quality is going to be so much better when you listen on devfridayshow.com. And that is now up to date because I've been busy, you've been busy, we've been missing things, and then I finally got everything mixed and you got it deployed, and we're all good to go. So all the shows are up there. And but before we started the show, we were just talking about I don't know, you've seen the startups, right, Mark? The like fractional ownerships of masterpieces, right? Is that the idea where you could own a part of a very expensive painting? And
yeah, but before there were NFTs, Tim.
Before there were NFTs,
this was the hot thing.
There's actual art that you could buy and put on your wall. Yeah.
You could own a piece of a masterpiece. So
well, before
painting,
you could own a piece of a masterpiece, you could actually own masterpieces, right? Like that.
Correct.
That's
if you had money for that.
Yes,
yes,
that's the thing. I think I remember seeing this. Wow, we're gonna go way off the already. We're like when Prince Charles became Prince Charles, right? I saw some headline about the royal family's fortune, and I think much of it is actually in art. Like most,
true.
and like what they own in terms of that,
like property, just the amount of property that they own around the world.
Yeah, but for some reason it's highlighting the art. So I know, before there were NFTs, you could own like things that people, like artists, would create art on paper, right? And then
that used to be a thing.
Yeah. You would purchase that paper, and no one else could have it because it wasn't digital, and you would own it. But no, there's a couple of like Masterwork or something. I forget what the startups are called, but they let you buy parts of it.
If we do have podcast listeners, if we do have any,
if we do,
then I'm assuming that they may listen to other podcasts. And one thing you will hear in other podcasts is advertisements for Masterworks. I hear it all the time.
Really?
I listen to a good number of variety of podcasts.
Yeah.
So it's a really popular thing to also for YouTube too. I'm a big YouTube watcher, so you occasionally will see I pay for the YouTube Premium now, so I don't watch the commercials. But if you didn't do that, oh my gosh, you'd see
so many commercials for
ads for depending upon the type of channels that you're watching. Which when I was into collectibles and reselling things, that was and also my art and design channels that I follow. Yeah.
Well, I mean that seems natural. Like if you're watching a video on art, they're like, don't you want to buy a fractional piece of the Mona Lisa?
So it is interesting, and there's some aspect of it that I follow from investment standpoint. That if the value does go up, so this whole Masterworks idea is that if you'll buy a piece of an artwork, and this piece is really just an imaginary piece. It's not like a physical piece. Like you don't own like an inch of this canvas.
Right, they're not going to send you a chunk because I feel like that would
I want to redeem
I would depreciate the value of the painting.
Yeah,
here you go.
But you own like this digital piece in a sense. Like I said, I think this actually became popular before NFTs. Probably NFTs were around, but this was actually before that. It seemed like, so you could own this imaginary digital piece of this fine art or this classical painting or even a modern painting that's worth a lot of money, and then that one piece has value, so that it could hopefully go up. So is it from an investment standpoint? It's
right, because
kind of interesting.
I mean, the idea is like there's 1,000 of you buying this fractional ownership, right? Yeah. And if the art appreciates, and it used to be $1 million, now it's $2 million. Now your little piece is doubled.
So it's basically also kind of like the way EFTs work, from the stock market. It's sort of like a mutual fund EFT. So basically, you own, like when you're putting money into your retirement account, you're putting money into buy, let's say Microsoft or Apple or whatever, and like you may not own actual shares, you may or may not, depending upon how your account's set up, but you may just own a part of this mutual fund that then owns the shares, right?
Right, because you may not be able to buy or want to buy in the
Yeah.
increments that you would cost
Depending
to
upon
buy
how it's
Apple
set up.
stock
But it's
or-
it's
yeah,
it's kind of interesting how, okay, so you have this kind of shared model of investment that you could all group together all of your resources and buy this really $1 million piece of art and then own a piece of it, and hopefully your piece can go up into value. So, but I was never interested in doing it. I never did that before. I definitely traded a lot of stocks and options, and I had a couple of years where I was definitely doing a lot of that, and I saw this at that time. I was like, no, this kind of feels a little bit, I don't know, shady, and I don't know.
Do you think they really own the painting though?
Just like NFTs, like the same reason people have a really gut reaction to NFTs. That's my reaction to this. I'm like, it just kind of feels like it's just imaginary.
It's like we all invest in this painting, and then all of a sudden, like, you know what? Turns out it was fake. Sorry,
Or where
guys.
is it? It's like it's stored in some warehouse. Like, yeah, it's kind of.
And I think most artists, when they create art, that's their goal. They're like, I hope that one day people like this so much that they put it in a warehouse to keep it safe and no one can see it, but they can just buy parts of it virtually. I think that's most artists' goal.
A couple of years ago, I saw this documentary on Netflix, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but it was a long time since I saw it. It was basically about the fine art world, about the absurd prices and how the pricing model works. And that's another thing I'm kind of fascinated by, because I used to go to with the art department, go to like New York and go to a lot of the museums in New York and kind of just see these modern or historical, classical pieces of artwork, and also just think about how much these are worth or how much they're being sold for. But just how the artwork works.
Interesting that those are different things. How much these are worth versus how much they're being sold for. Like the idea
that's true. Well, they're worth what somebody will buy, willing to pay for it. But does that actually really say? Or what happens? The really sad thing with that I saw in this documentary is that all of these people with wealth that they just want to just say they own these pieces. What they do is they may have a couple of them in their home, but what they really do is they put them in storage. So
right,
there's these huge storage facilities that have high security facilities that are they just manage the storage of fine art pieces.
And it's not like some villain in a movie where they go to these warehouses and they're like, and here's all my paintings. They're just like in a box, right? Like
it's
in a controlled environment.
It's just a box.
No one sees it.
It's just a warehouse with boxes. They've secured boxes.
And like I said, I think most artists, they're like, if only one day my work could be nothing more than a placeholder and a stand-in for currency stored in a vault that no one can see, man, then I've arrived.
Yeah, because what they'll do then, people who own that, they'll just make like a replica, a duplicate of, not a replica, but what's the word for it?
Like a copy.
A copy. They'll just make a copy of what the real piece, but the real piece they'll just have in a storage for security purposes.
Then we'll steal the copy and we'll sell it to Masterworks, and everybody will invest, and they'll be like, oh, it was a fake. Sorry, it's now worth nothing, but we have your money. Oh, by the way, I thought, like last week we rolled out our first sponsor. I just wanted to say, just for clarity, Masterworks is not probably ever going to sponsor.
But if Masterworks ever did offer, I would definitely be super interested. I'd be like, I don't know if I'd use your product, but I would definitely like to talk about it.
Wait, but would you accept payment for the sponsorship and fractional ownership of a painting?
Actually, interesting. I would, just for fun. Yeah, that would it would actually be interesting.
Oh, and you were saying they did this. You saw the same concept applied to comic books. You could own part of a comic book.
Yeah, so I was also into selling collectibles and either comic books, figurines, stuff like that. So I was into that for a couple of years, and so that also there's companies that specialize in just owning really expensive comic books that are encased in plastic that are highly graded. But then you can own a piece of that. So if you once again, I'm like, but
like they're encased in plastic, meaning it's not like even you don't open it up, you don't page through it, you don't read this.
No, it's that CGC graded, so it has like a grade to like a 9.2 or 8.5, and then it's sealed in plastic, and so you could own this graded. You could own a part of this graded comic book that's encased in plastic.
Yep. Yeah. So let's see. So far, Mark's been into collectible reptiles.
I've been into
collectible comic books, collectibles. So,
and we could talk about this week. I do two things I want to talk about, and you may have other intentions for the show, Tim. But you know what I like to do. I have
my intentions are never. Yeah,
I'm busy during the week, and I come up with this random crazy things. I did allude to the fact I would like to basically plan out the next iteration of our DevFridayShow.com website with you, to collaboratively plan out the architecture the design of it, not the design
This
from a
feels
visual
lot
standpoint.
this feels like a lot like work, but okay.
Yes. Well, but we're doing it in public, Tim. We're designing in public. It's the hot new thing.
Yeah, we're building in the open or something, right? Isn't that? Shouldn't we say that? Or, I don't know, something.
Before we get to that, though, I would like to kind of
Okay.
briefly talk to you about. I did another crazy thing this week. I bought another crazy domain name.
Oh, the Domain of the Month Club.
Domain of the Month Club. Do you have a bumper for this?
I don't have a bumper, but if you listen closely, you can hear there's a harp lesson going downstairs. So
You can make a bumper out of a harp.
I'm not sure
there.
Sure that harp music is the right for
Like
Domain
some type of heavenly
Month
tone
Club.
when you buy a new domain, like a little heavenly
It's like
harp tone.
Okay, yeah. Do like that little glissando up into the yeah. It feels like the domain went to heaven, but okay.
So I bought a new domain name because I was okay. I have this. This is you're gonna know exactly what I'm doing here. I wanted to finally push an MVP of a product out.
Okay.
Because I wanted to solve a couple problems. Okay. So as I am, I know this is the summer of Mark, and I'm working on my transition. That hasn't stopped.
Like hiremark.com, is that what this is?
So I'm saying, okay, I'm working on some projects. I need to kind of design some websites or some web pages and do some layouts for my personal portfolio and for projects I'm working on. So I want to have an easy way to do that. I want to have a visual way to do that. I want to have a no code way to do that, to lay out the web pages.
Serverlessmark.com.
Yes, getting there. But also, I'm also planning for in the fall's coming up, and I also have to, I have a reduced load, a teaching load, so I can still have time to continue on the summer mark and to kind of think about the future. But I'm also
ProfessorServerless.com.
But I'm also planning for teaching some web design courses. And what I would like to do in those courses to make it easier on myself and the students is to introduce some no-code editing tools.
Okay.
So still, we're going to be learning the foundational HTML, CSS, and to teach them that. Once they understand that, understand some design, approaches and some concepts and theories, and in order for them to apply them, I want to do that with like a no-code editor. And so one of the most popular ones is Webflow. We talked about Webflow before. Right. The one thing about Webflow, it is a hosted product. Now they have made some updates to it, which I took a second look at it this summer because I was thinking, oh, should I actually get into Webflow and use it in my classes? And I was like, because they actually have this workspaces feature, which actually it's designed for if you just want to use Webflow as a design tool. Because the one thing about Webflow I didn't really like is that it is a hosted system. So they
want you to create your pages and then host them there, and
so it's a great visual editing tool, and it's a great way to design. I actually think it's probably the best tool if you want to visually design websites. It's probably the best tool out there for that. But it was always a hosted platform where if you design your website on it, you're intending to host the website on their platform. You can't export out the HTML and CSS and the images, and you could move it someplace else. If you had one of the paid plans, that was a feature they always had. But the intent was always to host their website there. Now, they did offer this new feature called Workspaces, which seems like it's designed for people like me who don't really want to host their websites, but want to use it as a design tool. So they'll still save your designs on their system. So you come back, do iteration. Then when you're ready to go, you can then move export out your designs out and then put them someplace else, like use them on another platform. So actually I thought that was kind of interesting. But then, me, I'm a cheapskate. I look at so what's it going to take for me to get into it? Now, I could do the free version. The free version is limited to, I think, like 1 or 2 designs. And for a educational product, like if I was going to use it for my students, I think that would actually work fine. But I can't.
Do they not have an educational license? Do they not have
No, they do. They do have a classroom style. Like they do have an educational version of the product, which you could do. And I think I registered for that. I could actually use that in my classes. But then if you really want to have like multiple designs, you really need to start paying for their paid plans, which isn't that expensive. It's like $20-30 a month. I think it's if you don't pay the yearly paid, do it per month, it's like $30 a month. But I was like, do I really want to do that? Because if I'm going to go back and teaching, I want to actually the tools I'm going to teach. I actually want to be using practically every day, right? Because I don't want to be using a set of tools for my personal projects and then teach something differently in classes. So I kind of wanted to use the exact same tool. So they, well, why can't I do this myself? Why can't I do an MVP style product?
Why can't you?
Why can't I? Why can't you? Why can't
I? You know what?
Why can't I do it in a day, Tim?
No, I know I can't. I know I can't. You can't do it because you don't have the right domain.
That's true. That was part of it. So I did, and my initial intention was sitebuild.io.
There are developers everywhere. They're like, That's a stupid reason, but I understand it.
So I've always had this domain, sitebuild.io, which is another. I'm still actually working on that. And actually,
That's actually a sponsor of the show. Sitebuild.io. The entire show is brought to you by that all the time.
And what I need to do is have a tool that can help me design the pages for sitebuild.io, because I do have an intention of how I'm going to use that now. I think I have a pretty good idea.
Wait a second. You sitebuild.io is to build sites, but you need to have a tool to build sitebuild.io. That's interesting.
That's true.
It's
I'm going to dog food this, Tim. It's going to
what is the tool that built the tool to build the
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That's where I'm going with this. So I thought, okay, well, I can make like sitebuild.io and have like it's all kind of built into have the editor component of
I like it.
my build kind of website or side of the business. But I was like, okay, now I have an intention for sitebuild.io. That's going to be more of a consulting thing, more around AWS, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Maybe in August. Maybe I can have that ready to go and launch in August. But I wanted to just
shoot. It's already July. Did you know that?
I had no idea. Where did this year
go?
Summer marks flying by. I know.
Where did this year? Okay, so it's August. August. All right.
So I want to have a tool to help me build. Like I said, I have these pages, these websites I want to put up, also for personal and for educational purposes. So I need to have a tool for that. And I want it to be my tool. I want it to be something that I want to support. I want to do it in one day. So what do you think I did, Tim?
One
day. I want to have an MVP. Because it is a product. I am intending this to be a product that I could sell as a subscription. I'll talk about that.
OneDaySaaS.com.
No, so I wanted to first. Okay, yes, I did need the domain name. That's the way my mind thinks. And I know a lot of developers can relate to this, especially that have many.
Cannot build something if I don't know that there's a domain name out there.
So this is a no-code product. Okay, so it's a design tool. It's a visual layout tool for
nocodeeditor.com.
So yes, and if you try to find a domain that has no code in it, like no code something, they're all taken. They're all taken.
Okay? Yeah.
And what I found was also interesting researching this is because Webflow is kind of the model that I want. I basically want a Webflow that's not hosted at all. Like I want to have a design tool that works just like Webflow in a sense, but I don't want it to host websites at all.
It just spits out HTML for you.
Yes, exactly. HTML, CSS. I just want that. Okay.
No flow. No.
You're close. You're close. Okay. So the domain that came out to it, I was just typing some just random combinations, and this one actually worked. But I looked at it. I was like, this is the stupidest domain name I've ever thought about. No, I didn't want to go with the flow part of it because that would be too close to Webflow. But when I Google no code, Webflow comes up. It's like the top 5 results is like the Webflow website and the articles about Webflow. So I was like, okay, so I need to have something about no and code and also maybe web in it, but I need to kind of do it in a different way. So the domain is
code no web.
You're so close. You were so
web
close.
No code?
No web code.
No. NoWebCode.com.
NoWebCode.com. So you can go to it now. It's live, Tim.
NoWebCode.com. Yes, I'm doing it right now. NoWebCode. Is this just gonna rickroll me? Is that what this is?
Yeah.
NoWebCode.com.
NoWebCode.com.
I'm sorry that no web asterisk Flex is back. All right. What in the world? So is it Grape.js?
It's basically yes. It's basically just Grape.js, and to get this up online in a day, I'm basically just taking the Grape.js.
It doesn't read that way though. Like when I see the domain, like those domains where you thought you were spelling out this word, but then when your eyes see different combinations of letters,
so what
it looks like.
And I really like the
now ebb code.
That's there's another way that I could do this. So I do actually, if I take away the code part of the domain, which I like this domain name, even though it's crazy, but I like the no web as like a logo, like no web.
Yeah,
no web. It's so stupid.
I'm telling you, it looks like now EBD code.
I know. You can just say now eb.
All right, I can build your templates without coding. So, all right, I'm just going to fire up one of these real quick.
What this basically is like I said, it is just the Grape.js demo. And it is basically just one HTML file that has everything embedded into it right now. So my goal is I do need to, the next step is I need to break this, modularize it into a Node.js application, because what Grapes.js is, and you could, if you just Google Grapes.js with the grapes plural, it is an open source framework for developing visual editors.
How do I download it? I've made my design.
What do you mean? Oh, there's an export. There's an
Export.
where's under say view code, and then if you go to the view code, there's an export to zip.
View code. Oh, export to zip.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
So, like I said, what you're seeing now is basically just the demo. So they're prepackaged demo that actually they built a long time ago, and they have plugins and packages for the framework now that aren't included in the demo. But it's basically just one HTML file with CSS, JavaScript all embedded into one file. It does link out to a bunch of external libraries or packages, just using unpackaged.com, and so it is using a little bit of that. But it's basically just one HTML file that I just deployed it on a domain on the nowebcode.com.
And well, here's the question. How did you deploy this? Is this serverless? Or
It
is
is
a Lambda function?
Well, it's not a Lambda function, but it is using AWS with a CDK because I'm doing everything with CDK. I'm loving the CDK, Tim. We talked about this last week. The Amazon
Is this
AWS.
just an S3?
It's basically just S3.
It's just S3.
But it's S3 with CloudFront.
All right.
Distributing it across the world.
You know what? You don't want to serve up your single JavaScript file without deploying it to the closest endpoint to
That's
my
right.
browser.
That's right.
For sure.
That's right.
That's for sure.
So I do have the CDK. I'm using that. I have that. But basically, it's just packaging it up.
Where's the place where I can sign up for a subscription to this?
All right, so that's where I want to go to this. Okay, so once my plan for this, and like I said, I think I could do this in a couple, definitely through August. I think I can actually get this done. The first thing I need to definitely modularize this. So I need to convert this into more of a Node.js component style application so I can develop it. But basically, I'm not going to add too much to it, depending upon the packages or the libraries I want to include for the features. But basically, I want to keep the features exactly what you see here. It basically, because it works. And I could actually just use this in my classes right now if I wanted to. Now, the one interesting thing with how they deal with images right now is that if you add an image to the page, it does embed the image. It will do it. You can't upload an image from your computer.
But it puts the EP64.
Yes, it does. It basically just it hard codes that image into the HTML file. So if you look at the code for the
it's definitely a way to do it.
Kind of wonky, but it does work. And also, I was thinking if I need to use it with students, I could say, if you have your image hosted somewhere else, like if you had it on Replit or had it someplace else, you upload your image, you could just put the URL to your image and have it embedded in the page, and it would still work. And I could talk to the students about, you could just export out the HTML and CSS and import it back in, and I could figure out a workflow with it that I could actually use. So the way it is right now, I could use in my class. That solves that one problem. Also, if I want to use it for my personal projects, that also I could start using this right now and start designing up pages. Then I just need to have a way to manually back up the HTML and CSS and then bring it back in. But once I can get into a modular Node.js application, the next thing I want to do is to add just a very simple subscription model to it. So I'm thinking about how I want this application how to sell it. Basically just the only feature I want to have to sell is basically just to store the designs, right? So if you sign up and you want to store your designs and just have a way to reload the designs and have it just store the HTML, CSS images and just store for each of the pages. And then the end goal, which I don't think is going to happen in August, but what I really like this to be, then just be a design tool for frameworks. So if you're building your application on, like say your React application, even your PHP, if you're using, what do you guys use? Vue, your Vue application, and you have your front end for your Vue, your PHP applications, or even like a React native style applications. And if I want to design my screens for my applications in this tool, I just want to have a way to export it out to the proper formats, the files and the structure that those frameworks, want to have their front end kind of structured in. So you could have like an export feature to this that could export that, which thinking about site build, that's always what I kind of want to do. I always wanted to have a tool that I could always just export out into the framework that I'm using and just already have the design, the HTML, CSS already structured in the proper project structure and have have all the components kind of separate out to files, and basically just is an easy way to manage the design of your application. So I'm thinking from a subscription standpoint, it'd be just to save the designs and then possibly in the future then to be able to export those designs into different formats that you could have. But what I'm also liking about this is that the way I'm going to sell this is basically just what you see here. It's basically just to have the product sell itself. Like, so when somebody goes this and want to use it, they can just use it right now. Just go up to nowebcode.com and just start using it.
If I want to save it, or if I want to kind of create a library of things where I can pull in my own.
And that's where it makes sense to have like a subscription model, and they could have an account you could then store your designs to.
Right. And I'm guessing you could it has the support for like components that you can make your own, right? And
Yeah,
kind
the
of
component
drag
model
in
is
and
super,
things like
super
that.
cool because the reason why I like the Grape.js framework, even though it is a large framework and you do have to, if you're going to build with it, you kind of have to just build around the framework, and it does have a specific way to work that you have to kind of understand. But the way that the component model is built, so if you want to build like a component for a widget, like for like a carousel or some type of like a date picker, you manage the HTML for it. So the one thing I get a little bit concerned about when I use visual editors like this, what is the end HTML and CSS going to look like? Well, you have total control over that. So when you build a component, you structure the HTML and the CSS exactly the way you want it to. So if you want to have nice, clean, let's say class names or selectors or just the tags, the structure of the tags you want to use, you have 100% control over that. So when you design a component that you can allow the user to drag onto the page, you know exactly what the HTML and the CSS that's going to be inside the component. Because this is basically just HTML, CSS. That's all it is.
And there's not a way for me to do that now, though, right?
No, in the editor, you can't make your own components, or you can't edit the HTML, CSS. That's all done within the JavaScript in the framework.
But
So
you
when
would. That's something that you would add and say I'd sign up, and then I'd be able to make my own components.
If you want to, that would
start
that would be
dragging them
interesting
in.
too. Yeah. So if you want to make your own components to save, so basically like snippets. So as developers, we love to save snippets,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's basically exactly the same way. So visual snippets that you could use of HTML and CSS.
All right.
So I have a tool now.
Nowebcode.com.
Yes.
Now ebcode.
No web code, Dad. No web. It's no web.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh no web.
It's no web. It's no web.
No web code. No web code. All right. Well, there you go. There you go. This was a did it in a day, right?
Did it in a day. Yeah. So now I have this. I could start to design on some pages I have in mind. One page that we need to talk about is the Dev Friday show, which I do kind of like the design of it. I like the logo, like the color scheme of it. But we do have to talk about the next iteration, the next version. Also, the one issue that's been keeping our site a little bit lacking from a feature standpoint is the deployment. We kind of had our deployment breakdown and kind of used to be more automated with GitHub Actions, and the way that we had the structured is that we would it is a Gatsby project, Gatsby JS, I think version 3, I think back, because it made it a couple of years ago now. So it's a Gatsby JS, which actually I like Gatsby, even though you have your qualms with GraphQL. But I did like it. It is basically a framework that's built for generating websites out. They're mostly statically generated using Markdown and giving you like a GraphQL API on top of that Markdown. So you can just structure your data in Markdown files, and then the framework will scan those Markdown files, build a GraphQL API for that, so you can then access it through that with your components, everything like that, and to generate the pages. So I did like the framework itself, but the framework started to, which seems like it always happens with frameworks, when they go from like say version 2 to 4 or 3 to 5, they start breaking things. They said, "Oh, we want to rework the framework. We want to rewrite the whole thing." So once they went from like 3, I think it was actually just 3 to 4, but definitely from 3. If I try to convert this up to 3 to 5, it just breaks everything. I can't just do a simple like change my package JSON file to to load in the latest Gatsby version and just have it install the update package and have it works. It won't do that. It'll break all these dependencies that it has on the versions of these of the libraries that it uses. Breaks once it goes from 3 to 4, and even definitely into 5. So, and I never wanted to, it always seems like that always happens to me. That happened back in the day with Bootstrap. Remember Bootstrap?
All 3 versions, 4 versions, whatever.
Like, I love Bootstrap and I used it forever. But then once I think it went from version 2 to 3, I believe. I think that's where I kind of broke down. They really changed a lot of things. And to upgrade your site, you took a lot of work. And that's also what got me to think, okay, using frameworks, you're adopting this huge dependency that once the framework decides, oh, we want to rewrite the framework and do something different with it. And if you want to keep supporting that, it's a huge amount of work. And I'm like, so and then I get weird with frameworks then that just ask me to do all this extra work on top of, supporting it.
So I thought like libraries over frameworks in my mind.
So and also is something weird with Gatsby, which I think I could probably fix. It's probably just a specific node version that I probably had to figure out. For some reason it was working fine. And I wasn't going to update the Gatsby. I was thinking, okay, I'm probably going to rewrite the site and maybe using a different framework or different structure. So I wasn't really worrying about that. But the deploy was kind of working. But then all of a sudden the deploy on using GitHub Actions just broke down. It just stopped building, because usually the way we could deploy this, so you could just make a commit, pushed it up to GitHub, and then it just built the site and then deployed it onto Firebase. It's also hosted on Firebase right now. So the deploy or the GitHub Actions, the build process broke down at some point, and I was deciding I don't want to get in this because I was also realizing too that just the libraries of Gatsby are just like, okay, it's just annoying. So if I build it on a specific version, I think it's Node 16.0.2 or something like that. It seems to build fine, but then I could probably get it to work on GitHub Actions, but I'm lazy, so I don't do that. So I just build it on my computer. You tell me when you have the markdowns files updated, and then I pull those updates and then just build it and then just deploy it. It's easy to do. But the thing about the next version of this,
Next version.
this is where we need to build this in public, Tim.
Okay.
How would you like this? I'm even open up to if you want to have a PHP part of this. And if you want to do, if you don't want to do that, well, why wouldn't you do? Let's talk about that. Well, why wouldn't you want to do this if we were going to rework this website using PHP? Because right now it's basically just a Node.js, React style, statically built website. You just use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Node server-side languages used at all. So why not?
Only if the PHP was used to build the static site, because there's no reason for there to be the complexity of a page load requiring PHP to go fetch data and give it to you. It's our content static, right?
So
we
is
add
there
new
a
content to it?
PHP
There's
library framework or that does that?
Yeah, there's a project called, I think, Sculpin, which is a static site builder for PHP.
Sculpin?
Yeah, I think so. And it'll you just basically use PHP to say, look at this. Generally speaking, I think it's a markdown file. Get content from it, apply this template, and then you can use PHP to do the fun template rendering if you have some complexity there, like you need to for each over this or pull in these tags or something like that. But for us, it's really simple. Like you look at our site, I mean, I look at it visually, I think it works, right?
Yeah, does a job.
And maybe it's just like the there's no paging for the old shows.
True.
So maybe some paging there, but how do you could do paging two different ways. One, if you build a static JSON document that has everything, have the front ends fetch that and treat it like an API. But you don't need an API when you can just serve a static JSON file to the front end and it does the paging for you, right? Or just put it in the HTML, put it in the page that you render and have the list right there and have paging done automatically. Like all those things we can just build. So really it's like you say, it's the deployment process. How do we deploy this? Because right now, hitting the button, the thing that's supposed to build it, goes through, slurps up a bunch of markdown files, and then builds a GraphQL thing that the React and Gatsby code can query GraphQL to find the data that's needed. Is there a better way? Like sometimes we would say that's a static site. It's static because your client side assets are static and they can just be served. But we're doing a lot of active things there. We are building a temporary GraphQL database in JavaScript that is then being, it's available. I shouldn't say we're not like building it on demand, but we're coalescing our data into this GraphQL structure that then is being queried by JavaScript code. We could say, hey, throw all that away.
Yeah.
We're going to have a JavaScript object that says, I'm all of your shows, and here's a standard format. And then here's a player, you just look at the list of shows. That's all you need to do. And then the question is, well, how do we get that list of shows? Is that list of shows a JSON file that just gets included? Great. What builds it and what notices the fact that there's new data? Because right now, the thing that notices it is an actual build process that looks at all the code. Could there be something else that just notices, and I think this is where you're going with serverless, could there be something else that just notices, oh, there's a new couple files in S3, we should do some work on it? In fact, when you look at it, my process is I upload the mixed file that has UPAN slightly to one side, me to the other, has some noise gates on it, so we try to filter out some of the background noise, and has the bumper at the beginning and end. But I also upload something called the transcribe file that has you and me panned directly to the left and the right. We're on either side, so we could pass that to a transcription service and get a transcription for it.
Wait, so so go back again. So how are you doing with this? So for the transcription service, you said it's a different file.
It's a different file because it has no bumper music, and it has us just in two different channels. Because the one transcription service I was using would do speakers as long, like it would identify speakers, and if you said one speaker's on the right, one's on the left, it had no problem, and it would let you know everything that was said. Well, this is who said it. So that can be helpful for transcription, which I don't do anymore because I used to have it transcribed, and then I looked through it and build the show notes off of that. We're getting to the place where we could probably have something else, some type of AI, not really AI, right? Large language models.
That's something I'm actually this goes into like another product I was thinking about, which I have another domain name, Tim.
Transcribeme.com.
Podboostme.com.
Podboostme.com.
No, it's not .com. It's actually podboost.me.
Podboost.me.
So okay. Podboost.me.
Podboost.me. I have to type that out to see what that really looks like.
In the podcast 2.0, they have we talked about this before. Like in the podcast 2.0 spec, they have this like these boosts, the way to donate to a podcast. Basically,
still waiting to see that boost money.
To send something when you need to get boosted. So in podcast 2 applications, they usually have like this boost button that you could then donate to the podcast to send a little bit of crypto, a little bit of Bitcoin. So I thought, okay, would it be kind of fun to make a new website or a new podcast app that basically would be Pod Boost, and it would be designed around that, around the monetary nature of that. And Pod Boost Me, I kind of like that name. But the feature I thought about that, would it be cool to automate the transcription? So if you did, and how much would that cost? So if I want to have, because I'm also noticing too, if in my like I use what is it, the podcast app I use? I use the Podcaster or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah.
It's in the podcast app, I like it. It's actually owned by Automatic. They bought it. So it has nice integrations with WordPress if you're into that, which I'm not into.
Yeah.
It's a nice podcast app. It doesn't use like podcast 2.0 features, but it's a nice, clean podcast app. What is it called? I always forget the podcast. Yeah, Pocket Casts. Make sure I get it right.
Okay.
Pocket Cast. So I think I've tried a lot of podcast apps. I think it probably is the best one, both for iOS and Android. So I like it. But one thing I would actually like to do, if I follow a lot of podcasts, I don't want to worry about listening to all these podcasts. That's also a thing I've been finding. So I've been listening to podcasts for, 10, 20 years now, that I've collected a lot of podcasts I listen to that I kind of want to just bookmark. I kind of want to maybe go back to or watch, but also just like maybe there's a show that they do once a year that I was into because they talked about some library or some news thing that happened that I want to hear them talk about. So I want to have a nice search way to kind of find that. And what's the best way to search what they talked about or to do it through transcription. So I'm curious if I had a podcast app that I could add shows to and have almost the service that I use of the app transcribe the show for me. How much would that cost? So how much were you paying for the transcription?
I honestly don't remember. It wasn't too much when you just talked about doing it for an hour for two speakers.
Yeah. So if you had like say a subscription of let's say 20 shows, each show releases a new episode maybe like once a week. So you're talking maybe like 20 shows a week or something like that. It shows can vary between 30 minutes to an hour. How much would, of a cost standpoint, would that cost to transcribe each of those? So to do yourself.
Right.
So like the service actually would download the file, would have to send it to the transcription service, transcribe it, and then save the transcription to your own service so that you can then use that data for your own searchability in the future.
Right. I don't know. And if you're going to do searching, there may be even a better way than just thinking of it from a transcription side. I think for search, you could do something that would be similar to transcription, but not. That would still give you the ability to search and identify the words.
Still, but without looking at the audio, or
no, with looking at the audio.
Yeah,
I just think it would.
So to still do some analysis on the audio, but not have the need to transcribe it.
Yeah, the output may not be like here's a text file that you're then searching. It may be something different because especially for search, you're going to want all the timestamps and things when they're said, and you probably want it not to be, say, full text search where you're trying to match the words, but more like a Soundex type thing where it's you type this word, here are words that are similar, because what if it transcribed the wrong word? But no, my flow used to be push that out for transcription, get a file back, and then I would read that and create show notes, which I no longer do. But it seems to me we could throw that in S3 and have a Lambda function. Notice there's something new in S3, get it transcribed, bring it back. Once we have the transcribed text, maybe pass that to something else that could create a show notes summary type of a thing, or even suggest a couple interesting summaries that we could pick, and automate that. Because if we could get it down to the effort in getting a show online is just mixing down the audio.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then the thing that kind of I always have to pause and think about is like, oh, now I need to write up a little bit what we talked about, and since it was maybe last week because I didn't get to mixing it until Thursday night, and some of that. But again, along with that, the automation not being that we somehow add it and then run a build script that looks at everything, but an automatic thing where if we change the content in S3, it's noticed, and then something is automatic. There's not build. It's just on demand. Something's updated, and that's why I think in terms of don't build the data and throw it on the page.
Yeah,
build like some type of JSON file or a couple of them that the page
there
uses.
Could be value, because what you could do is, think about this. If you're going to dump the two files, like the audio file and the markdown file, so we need to have a little bit of a data to associate with the file, and that's what the markdown file could give you. Or it doesn't have to be markdown; it could be a JSON or YAML, or it could be any text format that we want to select. But we need to have some type of metadata around that audio file, right? So like the podcast name.
I mean, we could do that in the file, but yes.
Like, well, do you really even need the markdown file at that point?
Right. If you did the title and the date in a certain format of the file name.
That's correct. You can do that.
Right. Or and what's weird with S3 is we think of things as directories. S3 shows us things as directory, but they're not actual directories. At least my understanding of S3 is it's really just storing objects by a long string and giving you the option to kind of look at all the ones that match this in the beginning, I think is from a technical standpoint.
Yeah, when you're looking at buckets and folders, you're just looking at those are just being associated with that one file. Yeah.
So we could do it like, shows slash.
So that's interesting. Okay.
Slash
name. The way that we structure the name of the file, that could give the enough metadata, the essential metadata that we need.
The date and the time. But you're right. We do link it to YouTube. So how would we do that? How would we find that link? Could we find that link? And then could we trust AI to give us a show summary?
True. That probably needs to be, well, I don't know that would actually be interesting if you actually had the transcribe service, and Amazon does have a transcribe service. So I've never used it before, but it would be kind of interesting.
But I think you're right. We need something that, whether it's markdown or some files that we would throw in there with it, that would be like, here's the show summary.html. Here, and it would just pick that up. And if it doesn't exist, it just show the title. And when the summary exists, then it show that. And if we created the summary and put it in, great. If we somehow find a way for AI to do that, also great, right? Because it would just kind of happen. And as long as the file's there, the file's shown, we don't have to worry about build as much as we have to worry about if it exists, it exists. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Well, going back to the build part, I do think that the build is automated, where let's say if we drop the audio file,
but it's not. That's the thing. It's not. The build isn't automated. The system doesn't need to be built. This is not serverless. This is buildless. Buildless static sites.
Because I do think there's a benefit of is having a dynamically driven website, whether that be dynamically driven through server side or through asynchronous calls, or synchronous calls when the page is being rendered with through JSON or whatever, how we're pulling the data back in.
Right.
But let's say if we part of the build process was where you drop the file in, it does the transcription, maybe it does a little bit AI to generate the summary of that and the information we need. We store that data then in a database.
That's all stuff that can happen in the future, right? But like, to me, the immediate thing is drop the file in. Something needs to notice it and update at a minimum. Like, I want to say JSON, but some file that just the front end can use to say, oh, it exists. Because you don't want the front end to try to.
We just use a key value store like DynamoDB, or just something just to drop that data as like a record.
But do you even need that? Like, because you could just on that file change have a Lambda function update a JSON file.
But I don't want to write a file. I want to write, well, unless it's a document. If we're doing like a document store, if we're updating a document, but
I was like the bare minimum. Then you just throw it on S3. If we had like a shows.json,
But I don't want to
And-
manually update a file in
No,
S3.
not you manually. A Lambda function does that.
No, that's what I mean. I don't want to code that in a sense, because why don't we just dump it into a database that has like just a record in the database? You can just query things.
Because how does your front end get that database?
Well, that's the point of like either it would have to be done with some type of call to get that data when the page is being rendered, or we could trigger once that call is made and stores an updated record of the database, generate the build process to basically just go and rebuild the static HTML page again.
Right, but like that's what I'm saying. Why do that if we can accomplish the same thing by just saying a Lambda function says, "Oh, this file was added." The Lambda function is going to say, "I'm going to scan the shows directory, and I'm going to then just update the static file that gives links to all of the shows directory," because that's really all the client side needs. The client side just needs to know there's episode 1, episode 2, because it'll just look in there, and if it has a file, it has a file. If it doesn't show it. And that's what I'm saying. Like from a buildless standpoint, you don't need to do a thing.
Just look at the files that are in that bucket in a sense, and then build
have the Lambda function look at that, and not even build a page, but build this JSON file that becomes a de facto read-only API. And when the page loads, the page says, "Well, I know how to know all the shows that exist. I'm going to read shows.json." And that gives me links to all the shows. I look, if there's an audio file, then I should display this because the audio file name I'll parse to get the title. And then I'll look and I'll say, do they have a show notes.html or HTM or whatever we want to call it, right? Oh, they do? Then I can show the show notes as well. Oh, they don't? Then I'm just going to show the title and assume that that'll happen eventually. And then everything just becomes from like a serverless standpoint.
But you're storing it in one file then, like all the references to shows be in one file.
Yeah, why not? And that can build. You would have
seems
to
like
have
long term that could have some.
Because it get really, really big.
It could, but also just from a process.
Would it though?
Well,
like I mean, we could do it. We could do 1,000 episodes. It's gonna be 1,000 episodes in a JSON file. That's not gonna be hard to parse.
It is interesting. So what do you think? So what is the downside storing in one file compared to storing it in a database? We just store a record for a show.
Complexity. And I don't know why APIs I have screaming children behind me. They're
But the APIs are already there for you to do that.
Well, wait, the API, but that's what I'm saying. Like, what
write
API
to the
is
database?
To write to the database. But then I have to figure out from a client side thing, how do I access that database? And there's keys involved, and there's security, and I'm just saying, to me, dead simple says, I drop a file into S3, Lambda function notices it, updates
that part I like. Yep.
Updates a database, which is nothing more than a static file, because that's what it's going to end up being anyway. Essentially, we're going to want the client side, the page itself to say, well, I need to load this data, and this data should live on S3 because that's the easiest way for me to get it. Because we're not going to throw database credentials into S3, or not into S3. We're not going to throw database credentials into our front end.
Yeah.
So if that's all that's needed, let's just indicate to the client side, here's all the shows.
Okay, so just for storing, I guess for the minimal data to get this going, I agree. But then let's say we want to build in we want to transcribe the whole show, so it's adding more text, or then you want to add chapters and more metadata we around the chapters or how the audio. So once the data gets to be more complex,
maybe, right? But if we say upload a show, and then there's also in the show directory, right? Now there's the episode.mp3 and the transcribe.mp3. So as soon as those are uploaded, Lambda notices, says episode, cool. I update shows.json to list this episode, so at least immediately people can listen to it. I notice, there's a transcribe.mp3 that's updated. Oh, so that means we send that out to transcription service. That's all that Lambda function does, because the transcription service has a webhook that says I'm done. And when it's done, the Lambda function says, that's great. Let's store the transcription in the same bucket, right? In the same folder, but whatever, as, I don't know, whether it's, whatever that transcription format is, we throw it there. And then that should kick off something else. That should kick off, I don't know, an AI process to generate show notes. And that Lambda function probably just calls some type of AI model to create the show notes. And when it has the notes, it just saves them as notes.htm in the file, and it's done. and we are creating a database of sorts, but it's an S3 database.
You're creating a data lake, Tim.
We're creating a lake of data. It's
a pond.
It's
a pond.
It's a smaller thing. Yeah, you're right. It's a and I think it's definitely not a cesspool because we have incoming data. we have incoming data.
It's a puddle. It's a puddle.
It's a puddle. Like let's put on our boots and go splash.
Yeah.
But like and then everything is kind of, and that to me, when like to go back to last show when you're talking about serverless, that to me is like this is great because everything is just very simple. I just do the one thing I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I create a file. And and then on the client side,
I do like that. It's interesting. That's also one thing I was going back to this week when I launched the no web code. Because one thing that I always get hung up. I have a real big issue of, I always think about the long term of like, okay, well, is this like, I always think about like the worst case scenario of like, where is this going to go? And I should kind of have that in mind and kind of build towards that. But there's a lot of benefit of just getting it out there, like trying to think about what is the simplest solution. And even the simplest solution may not be the most scalable for the next years, but is that really needed right now?
Right. And here's something I say frequently. I'm sure some of the other devs on my team are like, yeah, he's going to say that again. That when it comes to deferring solutions, I like deferring them as long as possible because tomorrow me, is going to have a better understanding of the problems than today me. So if I can say, hey, let's not try to figure that one out just yet, I'm pretty sure that tomorrow we'll know more about this problem. So let's just get as far as we can.
Yeah.
With this. And then because frequently when we try to solve too much, we solve the wrong problem.
Yeah.
And then we realized we had a whole different set that we were like, oh, wow, if we would have known that was coming, well, how do we know that's coming? Just wait a little bit longer. Try to not solve it for just a little bit longer because you'll find that out. So, but I think from a building it in the open concept.
So I kind of like the idea, like forcing yourself to keep,
right?
To keep this, to keep it as simple as possible from that version 1, even though it's gonna be version 2, but say that, what we are moving into a different platform. Like I said, right now it's hosted on Firebase with Gatsby, and it's not gonna be doing that anymore. I don't even know if we would use a framework at all. I don't know. Like that would have, from a front end standpoint. Yes, I would definitely want to set up the structure with the CDK. So you'd have like your S3, your Lambda, maybe one or two Lambda functions that you need to set up. The cloud front for the distribution. And then for the start playing with the transcribe service. So when you, like you said, when you upload an MP3 file that's named properly, then that's read, and that'll trigger off a Lambda function. That'll then trigger off maybe using one of the queues to trigger then the
SQS or something like that. Yeah.
Transcribe service, and to see what can come out of that. Because I have no experience with the transcribe service to know how easy that is or what's involved with that.
I feel too like,
but we don't even need to do that for the version, just to improve that. Just the transcribe could be version 2.
It could be. And what's nice, what I like here too is if we make it very much file based, right? Then if we can have a transcription and kind of an AI model do the show notes, great. But if not, I can just upload notes.htm and it'll be read, parsed as HTML and just inject in the page. And for chapters, we could do the same thing. We could say, well, there could be a chapters JSON that lives in there. And if it does, the front end will display a bunch of chapters. And if we can get that automated, so it's created automatically off a transcription, great. If we can't, it's just create the chapters JSON and just drag it in, and it just works.
Yeah.
There's no, I have to kick off a build and then deploy the whole site. No, I think coming at it from it's a static site that doesn't have to be built, because everything it does is it just, you load the page and it pulls and shows JSON. And then for each show, it looks and says, does this file exist? And if I get a 404 not found, then no, apparently there's no chapter here. So I will show the alternative chapter. And like you said, you may not need to build it in a framework. This can be vanilla JS.
So what are and it probably, I'm thinking from a performance, I'm curious if we set this up, if we did use PHP to render the page. So it was basically a server side render, but do that within, let's say, a container. So it'd be like a very simple, it could be like 1 or 2 PHP files that could be doing this inside
But
of
what would
Docker.
we need to render the page for in this?
No, for when the
concept?
page is requested, when the website, when that request gets made.
But that's what I mean. Like, what's to be rendered? Because like this model to me seems to be a static JavaScript page that just fetches a bunch of JSON files.
But it's fetching that each time. I guess, yeah, it's like fetching each time.
That's the most efficient way to do it. I mean, well, you say each time, but I mean, if we're putting it on AWS, not necessarily.
It's true. It should cache it. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And browsers will cache it.
That's true. That's true. I forgot about that. So if we're using the distribution, it should cache it. So that should be fine.
And we can be smart at S3. Right. I shouldn't say we. S3 should be smart about headers. So it'll communicate to the browser whether or not you need to get this data again, or whether or not you already have it. Because I'm guessing S3 uses all the
what we could do is just set up basically from the caching standpoint, because I actually dealt with that, which is interesting. When I did the first deploy of it was actually site build. It was actually I was doing the CDK with pushing like a page of site build up and just kind of just defer to some testing. It was interesting when you do a distribution to CloudFront and you try to do a follow-up distribution to it, it won't let's say, there's a term for it. It's not deactivate, but terminate the previous distribution. Yeah. So to like clear it out. So you have to actually set that up in your configuration to actually do that, because it's not turned on by default. But what you could do is set up a feature so that if you want to have another in a queue or have something else trigger that distribution to basically deactivate the previous distribution and to activate the new one, that's easy to do. But it's just a thing you just have to know to turn on. So it's interesting, yeah, because going back and forth between serverless or server rendered or files versus databases, that's also something I always still, because my initial inclination was just, I like the model of throwing these files into S3, having the Lambda functions, be able to watch those and be able to trigger some functions from that. But then to still store the data into, let's say, DynamoDB and just then reference it from there. Because I think that would be the best way from a long-term standpoint to scale it. But do you even need that right now?
Yeah. And because if we're sticking in DynamoDB, then it's like, well, if we want to manually change something, we have to figure out how to query or run this thing in DynamoDB, which means either we're running, I guess this Dynamo's like not, no, I forget how you access that. It's not really SQL, it's their own little thing.
But it's a key value store. It's basically just a key document. It's kind of a blend between key value and document, because you could store documents in as values.
Oh, that's right.
It's basically just a key value store.
That's right. So, but if you want to do something manually, we still have to get into DynamoDB and update the key manually, which I know is not like when you're saying S3. It's
what do you mean update the key? We would have the part. That part would be automated too.
Right, but if it
procedurally,
wasn't, right? Like if it's saying like, oh, I just want to add show notes now. How do I do it? It's like, well,
we would decode it out to say when that, to write a function that would then write the data to the database. Yeah.
Right, but if we're adopting this file approach, it's like, oh, for right now we don't have anything automated. Just drop a file in there; it'll work. And then when it's done, automation drops a file in there, and it becomes. And if we don't like it, if we're like, oh, I don't like how that show note was, that didn't make any sense. Just edit the file versus going to Dynamo and then be like, I need to update this. Yeah. Because I want to change whatever.
Yeah, I guess then the only going back to one of the first features he said that would be nice to have is that we don't have right now is the paging per show, because you can play the shows from the homepage. You can switch between them,
right?
But let's say you wanted to page between the.
But that to me is a client side thing. Like loading 1,000 shows into a browser is not a problem.
So that's the thing I have to think about. Like, what's the best way to do the paging within just that single page, or are we going to have multiple rendered pages?
I think single page app just use fragments to show where you're at, right? Yeah. But again, I think you load a shows.json that has all the shows in, and you just do paging in the browser. Yeah. It's like, oh, I've got 1,000. You can just endless scroll or something, just so it's not like you're scrolling down to the end.
I don't like an endless scroll. It's kind of the way it is now. It's kind of endless scroll.
It is endless scroll, right? But I like that idea of you can just page through the stuff.
I want to show the latest 10 and then be able to page the next 10 and then still play it.
Yeah. And put it right there on the page. So, and then obviously, I think the most important thing is we need to have some space in there for ads, because that's the next step. Is we got to monetize this thing.
We got to boost it, Tim.
60.
We got to boost this.
64 shows in, and it's time to start making some money off this thing.
Time to get
Well,
boosted.
What we didn't get to today. Did you take the certification test? Or is that
Like I
next
said,
week?
the summer mark isn't over, Tim. Like I said, I'm still I
going?
haven't rescheduled it, and it's probably thinking the second week in August now. I definitely need to have it done before I go back to school, because I do not want to be thinking about certification as I go back to teaching. But I still, before I start the semester, I do intend to send out the applications, but these jobs require these certifications, so I'm like, I have to get that done.
Can't put the horse before the cart or something like that.
Yep.
All right. Well, next week, who knows? We might have a new site.
Maybe, since I'm all about trying to release things in one day.
Do it in a day. OneDayBuilds.com. Well, that's what you need for your
one day builds. That's actually really good. That's actually really, really good.
That's what you need for your I was gonna say your Twitch channel.
Yeah. One day builds.
One day builds.
That has to be taken. That's a good
It has
name.
to be. Wait, you're trying to get this domain now? Yeah,
I'm
One Day
looking to
Builds
save-
is definitely taken.
It's off. Yeah, it's a .net. You still get .net, and that's usually what I fall back to. But yeah, One Day. I'm curious, is anybody using it? Or they just bought it.
No, One Day Builds. It's about
Some maker thing.
no.
It's like
your
a
dream
what
site
is
done
this?
in one day. It's
Oh, it's
about
a WordPress. So it is somebody trying to build sites in one day
Yeah.
with WordPress. Hey, look at that.
total build price, ongoing maintenance, $1,500. Guarantee if your site is 10 pages or less, we will guarantee your site will be successfully completed in the course of one day.
Mm-hmm.
$2,000. Well, I'm not sure how this is going to happen if it's one day, because you got design revisions, development site.
Yeah.
How does that happen in
So
one
I found
day?
a site. Like I said, this is something I don't know. I was debating upon talking about it, because I want to talk about this a little bit later. But designjoy.com.
Designjoy.com.
Let me make sure I'm in the right website. No, it's not Designjoy. I'll have a bookmark somewhere else.
Designjoy.co. Is it design?
.co,
agency
yeah,
with
it's
a
.co.
twist?
Yep. Okay. So I saw this guy. This guy popped up in my YouTube feed,
Design subscriptions.
and this is a designer who he charges. So I kind of want to talk about this, going back to the freelancing or contractor world.
Mhm.
And look at, if you go down to where his plans are. So it's an interesting site. It's a single page website. He's a designer. He's productized his services. So what companies do, they pay him $5,000. He starts at $5,000 a month.
Mhm.
To basically, it's sort of like a retainer. So they have like unlimited requests that can be made, and then they can just they pay him $5,000 a month. So he has 20 clients that he has, and so his revenue is around $1 million a year. And he says the way the model works, he has some clients will give him like one request, and then other clients will give him 30 requests within a month. But he's able to scale it to a point where he's comfortable, and his revenue is over $1 million.
And average 48-hour delivery. So your idea is, if you're doing it, if you're like just putting in the pipeline, you're pretty much gonna get one request every.
Yeah. So what he tries to do is he only sells, he only advertises a specific set of design services, and then he try to builds workflows around that. So as we talked about, he's able to get it out as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So when someone request is made, let's say a new logo or a new website, he has either templates or systems that he has in place to basically kind of get that back to the client as fast as possible. So to keep his time low on each request that's made. But I thought that the pricing model is kind of interesting. It's also kind of interesting going up to, let's say, asking for, let's say, $5,000 to $10,000 per month from a big client, and then but it allows you to also just build a small client base. So a small client base that pays you a lot of money each year is kind of an interesting model. But
so two requests. So the idea is he's only going to look at one request.
Yes, he only does one request from a client at a time. So let's say he uses Trello, and he has basically a Trello board for each client that he uses. And then so the clients are allowed to basically build backlog requests in, but they're only allowed to put in one request one time into the active working on that he's going to turn around within 48 hours. So it restricts us from saying, okay, do these 3 requests, one time. He only says, okay, he's one request. So that could be a one singular deliverable. And then he, does that. And then it kind of updates in Trello. So I thought it was kind of interesting because he said like he was a designer, he was working full time, and then he came up with this idea over a weekend because he saw another designer kind of do something similar. So he built this single website on Webflow. He says he uses Webflow. That's also his tool that he uses for building websites. He uses Webflow. And so he built this one single page website in Webflow over a weekend, and then launched and tried to just get it out there as fast as possible, and then see if he could get 1 or 2 clients to start paying this. And then he started off with $5,000, and so then he was able to get, like, let's say 1 or 2 clients, at least give him a start, and then he built it to around. I think he said the reason why he doesn't want to. He's happy where he's at now. I think he says he averages around 20 active clients, but then it's also a subscription model where the clients that they said they don't want to use the service anymore, they could subscribe or pause it. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Something to talk about next time.
Yeah, maybe.
Because I don't know what next episode is going to be. I'm going to end the stream here so I can change that though. So